Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is Psych 92, Developmental Psychology. Today, we're going to cover Chapter 3, Infancy and Toddlerhood. So this is Part 1, Physical Development. We will always start with physical development because actually that is the impetus for the change in cognitive and psychosocial as well. So this is the progression we always do for every stage of development. So objectives today, you will learn about the overall physical growth, so the patterns that they experience as they're growing. We're also going to look at the brain growth because especially in infancy and toddlerhood, you'll see that it's exponential. It's actually more growth than any other time in our lives. Talk about sleep a little bit, look at reflexes, what's the purpose of them. It's also important for you to differentiate between gross and fine motor skills. Talk about the development of senses in newborns, habituation. If you're not familiar with that term, you will learn it. And also talking about just eating and what we do for kids. So this picture right here shows you just incredibly in the first 2 years how much a child changes. So neonate is newborn, and really not a lot of differentiating features in a newborn. Right? And most of the time their eyes are closed. And this is really kind of the calm before the storm in many ways. So parents, it's the easiest time the first few weeks in the sense that the baby's not really moving a whole lot. And all you really need to take care of is making sure that they're clean and dry and that they're fed when they are hungry. So this is a calm, and you can see already in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, they start to develop sort of their personality starts to come out in their features and they become much more distinct and individual. And by 2 years, very much their own individual person and their personality really comes out. So in the first year, it's really about temperament, which is biological in its kind of basis. And then by the second year, that temperament can be changed. Remember, we said it's a plastic trait based on the responsiveness of the parents. And by the end of 2 years, really their personality, it goes from temperament to personality, which is much more stable and unique. So here is a picture of the proportions that, babies go through. So fetal, you could see that at first, the head is disproportionately large in comparison to the body. And part of the change that happens is as we get older, basically the body catches up to the size of the head until you have adult proportions. If you ever look at the art from 14th century, even 16th century, and you look at how they portray children, it's kind of weird because what they did back then is they really thought of children as miniature adults. And so even in the art, the proportion of children's head was similar to adults. And so as, when we look at it, if something feels off to you, it's because the proportions of the children's heads in those art pieces are as of adults, not as of the children that we are familiar with. So some terms to know in terms of brain development: neurogenesis, right? Neuro meaning neurons, genesis meaning beginning. If you recall, when we talked about prenatal development, one of the statements I made was that we are born with pretty much all the neurons we will ever have in our life. So there is very little evidence that there's significant neurogenesis in the cortex after somebody's been born. So you're like, oh my goodness, that's counterintuitive in many ways, because as you get older, you gain more knowledge, you hopefully are getting smarter and everything. But the truth is that in terms of the neurons themselves, we never have more than when we were born. In fact, it goes the opposite, and we start to lose neurons. What increases are our synapses. So synapse, synapse, growing, right? Beginning. That is what changes as we get older. And that's what creates that when you look at a CT scan, why our brains look so full. It's because of the synapses. It's dendrites multiplying and making connections with other neurons. So new synapses form as a result of experience. As a child becomes more mobile, that's what causes this explosion in synapses. As they become more mobile, they experience different aspects of the world. They start to explore. that's what causes the development in the brain. Remember that you have gray matter and white matter. White matter is evidence of myelination. Myelination is when the axons of those neurons, it's kind of like the tree trunk. If you look at a neuron, it looks like a tree. The trunk part is called an axon. That can become insulated with a fatty substance. And that fatty substance increases the processing speed of the brain. So we want children to have enough good fat so that they can build those, they can have myelination occur and have that myelin sheath form over the axons. So this takes place very gradually across development and starts from the sensory areas to the motor area. So it kind of makes sense. Sensory areas are how it's basically our input devices as individuals, right? Are what we see, what we touch, what we taste. All of those components develop first, and then our motor areas develop. So babies are able to take in the sensations, even if they're not very mobile, but then it helps lead to brain development. So neurogenesis is the creation of new neurons, and as I mentioned, it's very rare after prenatal development. Any questions so far? We will talk a lot about brain development throughout the class. So some terms to know. Synaptogenesis, as I mentioned, you can break it down. Synapto referring to the synapses, and genesis is beginning, right? So new formation of synapses. Synaptic blooming is a time when there's a lot of synapses formed. So it's a period of very rapid neural growth. And let's talk about the nature-nurture component. So nature, remember we talked about canalized development. Brain development in many ways is canalized, right? There is a specific progression in which it occurs. What is the nurture part is the impact of the environment. So the way the brain progresses is very predictable. What is defined by the environment is how much stimulation is this child getting. So if the child is just lying in a crib and they're fed and everything, but not really stimulated, then their brains are not going to develop to the same level as a child who is constantly being stimulated. And actually, it's the social stimulation is more important than having all these toys around. The best thing you can do for a baby is sing and talk to them, cuddle them. It activates all of their senses and actually helps their brain to develop more. So we actually are very aware of the impact of the environment and the impact of social stimulation because of studies on children in orphanages. So in the Ukraine, I believe, and formerly, USSR, there were many children who were unfortunately ended up in orphanages. Well, these orphanages took care of their physical needs. They made sure that they had a crib, they made sure they were fed and they were dry. But because there were so many kids, they didn't really get a lot of interaction, social interaction. And what we found was that those children did not thrive. They didn't develop intellectually as well as they could have if they had social stimulation. Synaptic pruning is the opposite of synaptic blooming, and synaptic pruning occurs through our entire lives. So this is the idea of if you don't use it, you lose it. Our brains are trying to become more efficient, and so when we form synapses and there's nothing to solidify or strengthen those synapses, then it will disappear. And this explains why a lot of people might be multilingual when they're young, yet if they fail to continually use those languages, they're going to lose that expertise. So that's the idea of synaptic pruning. So the nature component is the timing. So children who don't use their skills, the synapses within the first 2 years, it's going to go away. And then nurture specific, as I mentioned, it is the use it or lose it. So if you have a child who is multilingual, I strongly encourage you to have them practice all of the languages. Language is not something like, how sometimes people say, it's like riding a bike. Once you learn it, you never lose it. That's not true for many things. You need to continually be activating it and applying it, or those synapses will go away and you will lose that ability. So myelination, as I mentioned, that's when you have the axons being insulated. So the timing of that, it happens throughout development. And as I mentioned, the progression is from the sensory areas of our brain to the motor areas. And then nurture is the impact of nutrition. Babies should not be on a diet. You should not buy anything fat-free for babies. You should try to look for things that have good protein, natural, not processed food. That's much better for a baby than anything else. And of course, I don't really talk about, but breastfeeding is the best for the child and for the mom. Any questions about this part? Okay, so this is a picture of a neuron. Components of a neuron. So the little branch-like things are called dendrites. So dendrites are what receive signals from other neurons. So although we are born with as many neurons as we will ever have, what continues to expand and grow are dendrites. And that helps us with forming synapses. The axon is that kind of tail or trunk component of the neuron. And those little bumps you see are the myelin, right? The myelin sheath, though, just like a wire that gets insulated, a myelin sheath acts as insulation on the axon and increases neural transmission speed. So when we talk about gray matter is really comprised of the nerve cell bodies and the dendrites. The white matter in our brains are those axons that are insulated with the myelin sheath. So when somebody is having all these different stimuli, it's actually an electrical stimulation that's happening in our brain. So that electrical stimulation causes the release of neurotransmitters, and that's what helps us actually with processing. So it's quite interesting. The neurotransmitters will determine how we respond. It is actually the neurotransmitters in our brain determine whether we're happy or whether we are alarmed or excited. All of these components are all happening from our brain. And so that's really important that as babies, you want to, again, really stimulate them socially because we evolutionarily evolved to react most to social stimulation, to connect with adults, right? Putting them in front of a screen isn't enough. They're actually not going to learn very much. If somebody is sitting with them and talking to them while you're watching, then that would be much better and actually increase the stimulation. But just putting a baby in front of a screen or in front of a toy is not going to be enough. So here is an example of the newborn brain compared to a 3-month brain. You could see just how much it grows. So on the left is a newborn brain, and on the right is a 3-month-old baby. You could see there's a lot more differentiation there in the cortex. You see all the folds and everything. And the brain size itself is actually much larger. So infant brains grow 1% per day for the first 3 months. So nutrition is extremely important. If the baby's being breastfed, what mom eats is really important. If the baby is getting formula, many studies indicate no matter how much we're trying to synthesize formula that replicates breast milk, it is never quite the same. It's still better than nothing, remember, so make sure that the formula has enough protein and different nutrients so that the baby's brain can grow well. Okay, so you all need to learn this. So our brains really have the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. Each hemisphere is divided into what we call 4 lobes. And what connects the hemisphere is something called the corpus callosum. It's a band of fibers. And that's what helps with the plasticity of our brains. So cortex is an outer covering of the brain, right? So in the cortex, that's kind of more of our involuntary activity, but also, we talk about the prefrontal cortex thinking. Okay, the cerebellum is right here at the very bottom, the kind of the yellowy component. That coordinates your voluntary motor movements. So gymnasts really make use of their cerebellum, right? This is their balance, coordination, and posture. So in terms of the 2 hemispheres, you have the frontal lobe in purple. Frontal lobe is responsible, it's called our executive center. of the brain. So it's responsible for things like thinking, planning, memory, judgment, right? That's why it's the executive components, the CEO of your brain. The parietal lobe in green processes the sensory information about your touch, about your body. So your visuospatial component comes from your parietal lobe. So where the body is, your spatial orientation, proprioception, that is from your parietal lobe. So frontal lobe is your thinking, so the CEO of your brain. Parietal lobe, you could think of that as like the taxi driver of your brain. Okay, occipital lobe is in the back. It's in pink. So if you've ever fallen, right, in cartoons, they show that if somebody falls, there are these stars around them. It actually literally happens where you get a sensation of stars. And that's because if you fall on the back of your head, you're hitting your occipital lobe. So occipital lobe processes your visual information. And then your temporal lobe, right here on the sides, kind of in blue, that processes your auditory information. So if you think about it, it's here on the sides about where your ears are. So auditory information and language comes from your temporal lobe. When we talk about lateralization, if you look at the brains, they are not exactly mirror images. There are different functions that some functions are only on the right hemisphere and some functions are only on the left hemisphere. So for example, there's Broca's area, that is responsible for your speech. That's only on the left side of your brain. But if something should happen, and we know this actually from people who have strokes and different parts of their brain die, and we really study, we take that opportunity because it's not ethical to do that to someone to make a part of the brain die. So we take advantage of natural events like strokes to learn more about the importance of these aspects of the brain. So Broca's area is on the left side. If somebody has a stroke and something, that's why they might be unable to speak, but they can still understand you. And that's because the speech part is on a different part than the production part of your brain. And that's actually a good thing, right? If they were both in the same area of your brain and you have a stroke, then you would lose both your ability to speak and your ability to understand at the same time. So it's good that these components are broken up. Now, remember, the younger you are when something happens, the more likely your brain, your body can compensate. That's the idea of plasticity. So when we talk about plasticity, specifically in your brain, we call that neuroplasticity. That's your brain's ability to change both physically and chemically to compensate for loss. And so sometimes it can actually, we've come to the point where we can use chemicals, medication, to help stimulate the growth of certain parts of the brain to compensate for loss in other parts of the brain. So you are responsible for knowing the different lobes, right? The frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, what they are used for, including the cerebellum and the cortex. Any questions? Okay, motor development. So as our brains develop, we also develop physically, right? So similar to the way prenatal development grows, when the baby's out, the initial growth again is still cephalocaudal, meaning from head to toe, and then proximo-distal from the center out. So that is how we start to gain our control and develop more as for the first 2 years of life. So what is canalized is sort of pretty much the average age and the range of the typical ages where certain motor skills are formed and developed. So we have fine motor skills and gross motor skills. Fine motor skills have to do with pretty much what you're able to do with your hands, something like printing, writing, pinching, grasping. Those are fine motor skills. Gross motor skills have to do with the larger body parts, your arms and legs and things like that. So if we're talking about kicking and throwing, those are gross motor skills. When we talk about drawing, crafts kind of things is fine motor skills. And so as people develop, gross motor skills develop before fine motor skills do. Okay, so here's illustration. So remember cephalo-caudal, cephalo meaning the head, cepha, and then caudal would be the feet. So it grows from head to down to your toes, and proximal meaning proximity centered, out, proximo distal, distal meaning distant from there, moving out. There are sensitive periods and critical periods. Sensitive periods means that development ideally happens during this time, but it is possible for it to occur later. So secondary language development has a sensitive period. Essentially, it's much easier to learn a second language by the time you're 12. Primary language development has a critical period. If somebody has not learned how to speak a first language by the time they're 12, they will never learn any language at all. So make sure you understand the difference between a critical period, where once that period is passed, it cannot be redone at a later stage, such as initial primary language development. Sensitive period is that it is much more difficult to gain these skills, but still possible at a later period. Any questions? Okay, so reflexes. We have many different reflexes. Sucking, grasping, and stepping are some, eye blink, rooting, the Moro reflex, Babinski reflex. So some reflexes we can tell are adaptive, like sucking, meaning as soon as you kind of put something near a baby's mouth, they start the sucking motion that helps them with breastfeeding, nursing, finding nutrition. Grasping, if you put like your finger or any object in the palm of their hand, they will grasp it and hold on tight. So this is not about them voluntarily wanting to squeeze it. This is a reflex. They do not have voluntary control about it. Again, the idea is it probably helps with safety and survival, that grasping reflex. Stepping reflex, even though they don't have the physical capability to walk yet, if you put a baby's feet on the ground or a hard surface, they start making the motion as if they're stepping. So the idea is that they're trying to build that muscle memory of the type of motion that they will need to walk. Eye blink reflex as well. That would be something adaptive to try to protect their eyes if something's coming toward them. Rooting is when they are seeking the breast, even if their eyesight is very poor, they'll be able to find it from that rooting reflex. What is less understood are reflexes like the Moro reflex. So a Moro reflex is when you put a baby down and all of a sudden their arms and legs splay out. We have not figured out why the Moro reflex exists. We just know that it does. And then a Babinski reflex is if you kind of stroke the bottom of a baby's feet, their toes spread out. That's called the Babinski reflex. So some are adaptive and some last throughout our lives, like the eye blink reflex. We have those for the rest of our life. But on the other hand, we don't know what the purpose is for the Moro reflex or Babinski. Why do doctors test for reflexes is because it's an indication of neural development. If a baby is missing reflexes, then that could be indicative of brain damage or neural problems. So for the first 2 years, or actually it's really the first year and first few months, the doctor is really testing reflexes just to see if they're present or not present. If they are not present, that could be the sign of a problem. It's one of our first indications of that. Any questions about reflexes? Okay. So in terms of fine motor skills, there is a definite progression. This is pretty much canalized, right? So about 7 months, they can grasp, they can reach out for large objects. It's so in that picture, you could see it's easy for them to grab a block, much more difficult for them to grab a little marble. At 9 months, so at 7 months, they use their whole hand. At 9 months, they start to use their thumb and finger. So we have like really studied how babies progress in their fine motor skills. And it's not until 9 months where they can do like a scissors or a pincer grasp, where they can actually pinch that marble and lift it up. So in 9 months, and finger, in 1 year, thumb and forefinger, and then that's where they can really grab the marble with accuracy. So in the first 2 years, you see a lot of improvement in their manual dexterity. So it's starting from just, being able to get a spoon into their mouth accurately to things like buttoning up a shirt, stacking blocks and everything. That's all within the first year of life. So just know the difference between the fine motor skills and gross motor skills. And the textbook actually gives a progression of that you should have a general idea of the differences in what people can do at 3 months and a year or so. I have that specifically. So in terms of gross motor skills, the development of being able to go from lying down to walking and standing, actually there's some variation. So some babies never crawl. Some babies go from sitting, and then depending, I'm guessing, on their environment, they might just start creeping. So creeping is when they're using other objects to help support them to get up and walk. Some babies start off with just rolling over, and then their crawling is a little bit different, where it almost looks like a seal. So there's a lot of variation in the motor development of the gross motor skills. What is similar is that control of the head comes first. Remember, development is cephalocaudal. So the first thing that parents usually look at is, can a baby lift up their head and control their head? And that's really important just for nursing and safety components. You always want to support a baby the first few months especially, and be careful of the type of control they have over their body. So generally the large motor skills develop before the fine motor skills, which completely makes sense. The sequence is pretty much the same. There is wide variation though in terms of, and I think it's part of his exposure, part of it is just inherent strength of how quickly babies can walk, but eventually everybody gets there. Sensory capabilities. So this is really fascinating. Of course, I teach developmental psychology, so I think so. How do we know when babies can't tell us how well they see, how well they hear, and things like that? So habituation is a technique that researchers use. And for babies, one of them is what we call a preferential head turn. So if there's a stimulus, what they'll usually do is show them 2 stimuli, and they'll see which way the baby's head will turn. Or they could be lying down, and they might see if a baby's head will turn based on a noise that they hear. And this is how we know that babies actually have excellent hearing from within the womb. They've done things where they'll have the mother read a certain story while she's pregnant. And then once the baby is out, when she starts reading that story again, the baby will turn its head because it's familiar. So these are little things that we use as researchers to figure out, how babies are responding to stimuli and what their preference is. It's called preferential head turn. The other one is the habituation technique. So here we're taking advantage of that reflex for sucking. So you put a pacifier in the baby's mouth, you can see there's a cord, and what that cord is doing is it's recording the sucking rate. What we know is that when babies get used to something or getting bored, their sucking rate slows down. When they see a new stimuli or they're interested, their sucking rate goes up. So preferential head turn and habituation are 2 ways that we like to kind of explore the world of babies and their sensory capabilities. In terms of vision,
Professor?
Sure.
Hi. Could you please explain the habituation technique again, like how the sucking rate was changing? I wanted to understand a little
Sure.
bit.
So habituation is pretty much, you get babies used to it, they get bored. So
Yeah.
the idea here is, for example, if you have even a screen in front of a baby and they're looking at a scene, they'll let the baby look at that for a few minutes. And meanwhile, they have the pacifier. So when the screen first comes on, the sucking rate of the baby is actually quite fast. And as they continue to look at the screen and the baby gets bored, they slow down in the sucking rate of the pacifier. Then what the researchers do is they introduce something new in the scene, maybe a cartoon character. What we know is that when the baby registers that new stimuli, the sucking rate increases again.
Okay. So I'm just trying to connect. If there is a stimuli and the sucking rate is increasing, what are we trying to establish here?
They notice the stimuli.
Okay. Okay. All right. Great.
Right.
Thanks.
Sure. No worries. Yeah, so it's our way of knowing, have they registered that new stimuli that's been introduced? So at first the stimuli will be very obvious, like maybe a big red ball that's hard to miss. And then they might, and then they'll make the stimuli less and less obvious, but still there. So you go from a big red ball maybe to a blue ball, to a green ball. So that's how we also know about colors, how
Oh,
well baby can register colors and things like that.
all right. Okay, great.
Sure. So in terms of sight, it's one of the poorest developed at birth. So visual acuity is really, really bad. Newborns, you might notice their eyes don't even converge. Like one eyeball might be going one way and the other, another direction. So eyes aren't able to focus until about 6 months on average. And color perception is really poor. So for the first 3 months, those colorful toys that they usually have for babies, it doesn't really register in the first 3 months because their visual acuity is so bad. So this is an example, and this is, talking about that fixation. Fixation is how long babies look at something. They have done tests to see what babies prefer to look at when they are newborn. So number one is a human face. They love human faces, right? That's number one. What else do they look at? They tend to look at black and white contrast and red. So a lot of any stimulation you want to use for baby for the first 3 months really should be red, black, and white. The other colors aren't registering for a newborn baby. So you could see yellow and white by itself it doesn't hold their interest. Number one is a human face, and that's why I say the social stimulation cannot be replaced by any kind of toy or by any sort of screen. They really need the social interaction. That is what we are evolved to do. So they look for, they might scan, and the other part is for human faces, is they start to note things like mom's hair. Is it dark or is it light? Number one for baby are that they look at the primary caregiver and register what those features are. So they won't know whether mom's wearing makeup or not. What they know is mom's hairstyle. The other part I would say, we'll talk about this, is smell. Babies also pick up on natural scents. So you don't want to be wearing cologne or perfume in the first few months of life to get the baby used to your pheromones, to your scent. It brings them comfort. Hearing, as I mentioned, is really well developed when they're born. So there's an example of the sucking conditioned sucking that they use, that we really use that a lot to a great extent in newborns to figure out what's happening. So hearing is really good. They will turn when they hear, because their sight is really bad. So when they hear noises, they're going to use sound to locate items. We know that they prefer human voices. And because they can hear in vitro prenatally, they also prefer the languages that they heard when they were inside the womb. So if mom is speaking Spanish, for example, and even if it's not her voice, the baby will react to the Spanish language more than any other language. So it's really fascinating that we do develop a bias even before we're born, right? Based on what we are exposed to. Any questions about hearing or vision? Okay, taste and smell. It seems like they can, both taste and smell really easy. The way we test it is we actually give them a little bit of taste of something sweet, something sour or bitter. So their facial expressions convey to us that they can differentiate between those tastes from among those tastes. We are actually predisposed to prefer sweet tasting things, right? So that's sort of our built-in sweet tooth. They know mom's scent. They can differentiate mom's scent from everybody else's. And this is why I would discourage mothers from wearing any kind of scented things or perfumes. You want the baby to actually know you naturally. And so that's true even for dads. There is sort of this built-in component to us that we are naturally drawn to those who have pheromones that indicate that they are related to us. It's sort of an evolutionary component to that. Okay, intermodal perception. This has to do with using more than one sense, right? So how do we know babies have intermodal perception? Well, for example, we will put a pacifier in their mouths, one that is smooth and one that is bumpy. and they'll be looking at a picture of a smooth pacifier and a bumpy pacifier. And amazingly, the baby will look at the bumpy pacifier if they have a bumpy pacifier in their mouths. So they can already make that connection between what they are looking at and what they are feeling in their mouths. It's really fascinating. So yeah, this is the example that I was telling you. And so that's a really important skill, because what it's doing is it's making that connection between the visual stimulation that they see and the tactile information in their mouths. Intermodal perception is also what is used when babies, they actually imitate whatever the parents are doing. So think about that. If they're looking, or if they're looking at an individual and the person is sticking out their tongue, the fact that baby can look at that and replicate that action is really incredible, because that says they can take that information, what they're looking at, and they instinctively know which body part they have to use to replicate the facial gesture. So we're able to do this. Really young babies are able to do this, and they believe that the function of the skill is actually to build social connection. The more social connections a baby has, the greater their chance for survival. More people will want to take care of them. And so this is also part of the reason why babies look so cute, right? They look so helpless. We actually, adults, have an inherent urge to take care of these babies. Again, part of survival. So in terms of feeding and growth, as I mentioned, breastfeeding is best, right? Breast milk is considered the ideal diet. It's easier to digest for babies. We still have not been able to create synthesized formula that is as easily digestible for babies. It also has antibodies. So breastfed babies tend to be less sickly than ones who are bottle fed. So breastfed babies eat more often. They know to stop when they're full. They might grow less in the first year, but they tend to be healthier. And there's overall low rate risk of obesity. When a mom is nursing, it actually burns a lot of calories, so it helps mom lose the weight that she's gained when she was pregnant as well. So just a lot of positives to breastfeeding. In terms for moms too, they found that lower rates of breast or ovarian cancer for women who nursed all of their babies. Okay, so in terms of solid food, usually about 4 to 6 months. You should not be introducing solid food until the child can sit up easily. That's just a safety component. Babies should be able to sit up and hold themselves up easily. Introduction of foods needs to be fairly slow. So you start off with really bland food, like kind of rice. Oatmeal comes a bit later. You should be introducing it very slowly, maybe like 1 or 2 weeks at a time. And because you want to make sure that the babies aren't allergic, right? So start off really, really slow, and always continually looking for allergies. And it's not until about 10 to 12 months that babies will start to get the finger food and be able to feed themselves with that component. So it's really important not to rush introducing solid food for babies. Okay, so just in summary, a lot of growth in the first 2 years. Keep in mind that the proportions of babies' heads to their bodies are really different from adults. And as people get older, the bodies basically catch up to the heads. Synaptogenesis, quote unquote, replaces neurogenesis. Remember, we don't really develop more neurons after we're born. What we do have are more synapses, and that's what are the connections between the neurons. We talk about multidirectional development, right? So as voluntary movement increases, our reflexes decrease. That's the gain and loss there. Make sure you know the different levels of development of the different sessions when somebody's born and how we figure those out. Make sure you know the different lobes of the brain, what they're responsible for, and also a general understanding of that habituation technique, the sucking rate, and the preferential looking. Let's stop sharing. Any questions? I'm going to stop this recording for this part.